Hey guys, Attila here from Scilanda. I want to talk to you today about something that's pretty common in your business. You probably don't think much about it. It's your website. And you're probably wondering, hey, is my website secure? Because we keep hearing about all these phishing attempts and all these compromised websites that are out there. And I wonder if your business website is safe and secure. And we can talk a little bit about what that security might look like, and maybe give you some tips on how to improve your security posture. So number one on our list is about password management. Everyone loves to have a easy to understand password to access perhaps the admin page of their WordPress site or the cPanel for their hosting, but everyone hates a complex password, and complex passwords, of course, are the best. And I'm not talking about password with a 0 in there and an exclamation mark at the end. I'm talking about something like XQ exclamation percent, tilde 7 pound, something like that. That's really complex, and that really sucks to remember, and so you're probably going to be tempted to put that onto a post-it pad. Not a good idea. Let's use something like a password manager. There's some really good ones out there. Recommend LastPass or Keeper. There's Dashlane, and if you're really high tech, you can use KeePass. It's a great little open source utility that lets you do it. Either way, the point is, if you have a password manager that allows you to encrypt essentially a file which contains all of your passwords, and you can put the password for your website in there, so you don't have to use a common password that can potentially be compromised. So lesson here, use a password manager to create and use a complex password. Number two is your hosting provider. Now, everyone talks about GoDaddy, and they're very happy to put their website on there. It's a couple bucks a month and or a year almost, and you get to use one physical server shared with 20,000 other websites. Hey, what could go wrong, right? Interesting. What tends to happen with these kind of budget hosting providers is that when they do stuff, thousands of websites onto one physical device, you end up getting an infection at some point from one of those other guys. They get into root, and then they go right up from there. And so your site, even if it has zero PHP or a straight HTML website, could still get infected because they get in through the root, and through the root of the system, they get up into those shared hosted sites, which could be yours. And that's a real kind of a pain. And if you call GoDaddy, they're going to tell you, hey, we can sell you some sort of security monitoring service for a few $100 a year, and sign here, and we'll keep you safe. Well, what it really comes down to is the hosting provider has security problems. You're not going to solve that problem, so go with a quality hosting provider. And I'm not knocking GoDaddy. GoDaddy's great, but they also have their more premium plans. Those, if you pay a little bit extra for, generally don't have a lot of those kind of security problems, because they're not in the you're not in the nosebleed section of the hosting world. So get a little bit better hosting provider. It's going to give you better performance and more security. Number three on here is avoiding multiple sites on a single server. Now, if you're self-hosting some sort of solution, and you start piling on a bunch of sites for yourself, maybe you have a wholesale and a retail side of your business. If you put both of those into one packaged plan, sometimes there could be a cross vulnerability between the two packages. So try to separate them out. It's kind of like thinking of the batteries in your remote control for your television at home, right? You may have two batteries there, not one big one, right? You can kind of distribute the load a little bit better. So follow that same philosophy when it comes to your sites, and try to segment them and segregate them and kind of firewall them off as well as possible. Number four is website backups. We all talk about backups all day long. I think it's really kind of a tired subject, but websites also need to be backed up. Depending on how often you change the content, that should be your backup frequency. Once a month is plenty for a site that doesn't change very often. In fact, once a year may be plenty for that. But if you're writing blog posts, you're updating your site regularly, which you might want to do if you want to stay competitive in this world of business, those backups could probably be nightly, weekly, something like that. And if you are using WordPress, there are several backup plugins that can do this for you. Just be sure to get it out of the actual WordPress site itself. So put it inside of a Google Drive, Amazon S3, OneDrive, whatever. There's lots of choices on where you can get it, but the idea is to get those files out of there. Be sure to move your database, your files, and any sort of external backups you may have of file folders within the file system, so that way you can get the whole thing out of there and you can get back up and running pretty quickly if you choose to change hosting providers or if the hosting provider has some sort of compromise. Number 5 is to segment your database from your file servers. Now, typically when you get into hosted environments, there's an option to plop your database and your file server all into one. And that's great until one gets overloaded, and then kapoof, everything goes down. So as you build your sites to have more and more traffic, try to segment a series of database servers that can actually provide content. And this is important, especially if you're using WordPress, and to try to put your actual files, your PHP files or whatever language you choose to use, put those in a separate VM or hosted instance or a VDI. So and number 6 we have here is use HTTPS, TLS, right? So SSL certificates are kind of expected now. Google, Microsoft, all the major web browsers released some updates that required them to show an error message if a site was considered insecure. That means an expired SSL certificate. SSL certificates can be bought for pretty inexpensive from a variety of places. I personally like Namecheap because you can get a certificate there for less than $10 a year. But GoDaddy has them everywhere from $170 a year, depending on where you were. Now, these things can be very expensive, but just know that a certificate just means that a third party has looked at your site, looked at your information, and verified based on their methods that you are secure, and issued you a certificate to validate your identity. And that helps visitors that are coming to your site feel more secure browsing your content, and if you have some sort of e-commerce component on there, from buying from your website, because that's a real concern, right? You want to make sure that that lock is up there in your browser window. Number 7 on our list is to disable features that you don't use in your site. So one of the favorite WordPress plugins is Hello Dolly. That's great, but it doesn't really serve a purpose. So the first thing I do is to remove Hello Dolly from all WordPress installations. Sorry, Dolly Parton. I know that's what it's there for. It's giving a little bit of a tribute, but any sort of unnecessary WordPress plugins, cycle through them occasionally. If you have a plugin called WordFence, it'll look to see if your plugins are out of date or no longer supported or abandoned by the developer. And those plugins you're going to want to replace or update your code with something more current so that you can continue to run your website without risk of compromise. Number 8 is patching. I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but WordPress and many other CMS, content management systems, have vulnerabilities that are discovered pretty regularly. If you don't patch it, you become vulnerable. You can become taken over, infected, or you can act as a malware relay point. You don't want that for your site. So just go in there and patch regularly. Now, when I say regularly, that's a tall order, right? How often is regularly? Let's say once per week. There are some WordPress plugins that can go in there and do updates for you automatically on your sites, including your themes and your core WordPress files. Be sure to, if you feel confident enough, to install that inside your site so that you can keep them up to date. And this kind of security problems don't happen with you. Number 9 is about building layers of security. Now, security is interesting because what you want to do is have a layered approach. Layered approach, that means is that you're going to have multiple things that protect you rather than one big thing that protects you. Think about it when you go out into the snow or into the sun. Let's just say the snow because it's easier, right? You're going to put on underwear and jump out into the snow, right? No, you're not. You're going to put on underwear, you're going to put on some heavy jacket and some heavy pants and some boots and some mittens and a hat and all these things to keep you warm, right? That kind of makes sense. You want to have multiple layers of security around your website as well. So if you have the option to turn on two-factor authentication, that allows you to not just rely on a password if it is breached, but text message that comes through or a Google Authenticator to validate that you are who you say you are when you go inside your site. There's also, you can do IP filtering, you can do geo-blocking, so you can allow, or should I say deny, anyone from outside the United States from accessing your site, and that's particularly useful if you're not doing business from outside the country. So stuff like this can add additional layers of security. So think about all the things that you can do to add security layers to your site, and hopefully you won't become a victim. I hope this helps secure your site. If you want to chat, or feel free to reach out with any questions, we can probably help you out with some advice. You stay safe out there. I'm Attila with Cylanda. Aloha.